I don't know why I need 16 claps. If you've ever seen a movie with the clapboard, they don't go. Welcome back. I made it past the BookTube newbie tag, which was my one goal for my life. I can die happy now. Welcome back to Notes by Alex. I guess that's what the channel's called. I could not think of anything better than that. Behind the camera there, through the window, it is just a dismal day here in Canada. You cannot see the sun through the clouds, and on that basis, I thought it was a good idea to talk about a apocalyptic book. Don't know why I made that connection. I'm going to talk about and try to review and recommend The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I read 6 books in January. 6? I think 6. And this was my favorite far and away. Cormac McCarthy, what a guy. He can write a book. This is the second time actually where I have gotten one of his books free of charge and gone and bought it after I finished it. Sometime last year, I think I don't know when last year, I read Blood Meridian and I borrowed it from a friend, shut the last page and went and bought a used copy for myself because I knew I'd want to reread it again. This time I got The Road on my ebook through Overdrive. It's the library app. Read it, finished it, went out and bought a used copy because I know I'm going to want to reread it. He has that effect. Blood Meridian and then The Road are the 2 books that I've read by Cormac McCarthy, and both times I have been stuck thinking about them weeks after I finished. I'm on 2 other books now, and I'm still thinking about The Road. Same thing happened with Blood Meridian, so there's something to his writing for me. He's quite an interesting guy in the sense that he kind of just started putting up books. They got well known, and he refuses to even show his face most of the time. He doesn't really do interviews. I think he's done 2. And actually, if you have any interest in his books and after you've read it and you want to learn more about Cormac McCarthy, definitely go watch the Oprah interview. It's probably the worst interview I've ever seen in my life. He's won awards for his books and they've held ceremonies in his honor. There's some story where some art institute was holding a dinner in his honor and he said, "I'm not going to show." And they put it on and he didn't show up. And apparently the award, whatever frame thing he got from that, is hanging in his lawyer's office. This is just what I'm reading from online. So he's obviously a bit of a recluse. Honestly, it's a vibe. I get that. But he hates talking about his books. He likes just putting out the book and that's all he has to say about it, which I think is really admirable. It's probably really tempting to write a book and then explain what's so important about it to people afterwards, but that takes away from something. His books stand on their own 2 feet, and what you take from it is what you take from it. And if you don't get anything from his books and you don't enjoy it, he seems to be just fine with that because he's put out his statement. And I really appreciate that. I think that's an awesome way to look at things. Before this becomes a video just about Cormac McCarthy, I just want to point out one thing that is interesting about him. He's obviously a man of integrity, to the point where I would say you could probably ease up a little bit. He was pretty poor when he started writing, and almost adamantly so. There's stories where one of his first books kind of took off a little bit and a university was going to pay him $2,000 to come talk about the book. And he was living out of motels and he said, no. Yeah, so they were going to pay him to come lecture about a book at a university. He just said no, and he kept on living out of motels. And he talks about how when he was really poor as a writer, he didn't have money for toothpaste, which is dude, you gotta work one shift at a grocery store. You have to get some toothpaste. Anyways, this is not a video about Cormac McCarthy, so I guess I should review the book. The Road was published. It was published in 2006, and it won the 2007 Pulitzer Prize, which I guess is good. That sounded so sarcastic. I'm not winning Pulitzers for anything ever for the rest of my life. No, in all seriousness, it's an awesome book. I guess I'll start talking about it. The Road is a pretty simple story. It's apocalyptic, and it's about a father and a son traveling this wasteland. And there's a lot more to take from it, but that's really the meat and potatoes. The world's a wasteland, clouds of ash covering the sun, so even the day's kind of dark. It's not dark, but gray. You never get any vitamin D. And yeah, ashes rain from the sky. All the waterways and rivers are black with ash. Lots of ash in this book. And he never really explains why. He kind of hints what happened, but doesn't explicitly state. So readers, lots of people think it was a nuclear holocaust. I've heard a meteor theory. What I kind of like is that it's not very important. I personally lean towards something happened that is not of people's doing. A big part of the book is about what happens to humans once the writing's on the wall. Once things start going down, what will you do? And what will you do to people? How do you treat your fellow man? How do you move forward from that? I think that if it is a nuclear holocaust, for some reason that kind of dampens the theme a little bit, because there are bad people in this book. And I think if the world getting to this point in the story was because of people being bad, I don't know, it's just too on the nose. Anyways, it doesn't matter. This isn't even a review. I want to review and recommend this book as best I can without spoiling it, because really you should read it, is my recommendation. And if you don't like it, it's short. It's like 250 pages. Sorry, 287, just under 300, but it's pretty large typeface. There's lots of paragraph breaks, and it's a fairly easy writing style. If anyone cracked open Blood Meridian as their first Cormac McCarthy book, and then they said, I'm done with him, this is actually the one to start with. If you were not a fan of Blood Meridian's writing style, this is a lot easier to read, which is not a criticism. Blood Meridian is written like a biblical epic. I think this strikes a really good balance. There's bits of really simplistic writing in here, and then he'll just pull out all the stops and have this big paragraph of just like some of the most beautiful prose you've ever read in your life, and it just hits you. There's a lot of really simple passages, but he has a way with words. I'm going to read something from like the second page. So this is really not a spoiler. It's actually kind of the thesis of the whole book in some ways. When it was light enough to use the binoculars, he glassed the valley below, everything paling away into the murk, the soft ash blowing in loose swirls over the blacktop. He studied what he could see, the segments of road down there among the dead trees, looking for anything of color, any movement, any trace of standing smoke. He lowered the glasses and pulled down the cotton mask from his face and wiped his nose on the back of his wrist and then glassed the country again. Then he just sat there holding the binoculars and watching the ashen daylight congeal over the land. He knew only that the child was his warrant. He said, if he is not the word of God, God never spoke. I haven't had to do that since like 5th grade. That was really weird. But it's a really simple passage for the most part. There's little things that I appreciate. I like that he says he glassed the valley below. He's talking about binoculars. And for me, like you just pick up on stuff like that, but that's not really a word. And there's times where he'll put in words that are entirely his invention, as far as I can tell. I mean, you can search them in dictionaries and stuff and they don't show up on Google or like any online dictionaries. But he uses them in a way that you know exactly what he's talking about. And he has the authority to do that because he's such a good writer anyways. Again, really simple passage, but I love how he basically says his kid is everything to him. The child was his warrant. If he is not the word of God, God never spoke. That's amazing. Another author that I'm a big fan of that uses really simplistic writing is Ernest Hemingway. And as much as I really appreciate Hemingway, if he was writing a story about a father and his son, he would just say the father loved the son and the son loved him back. And that would be the whole thing. And like, it would still be good, weirdly. But there's just something about Cormac McCarthy's writing that is awesome. I think if you are a reader who isn't too worried about prose and the actual formation of sentences and paragraphs as an art form, this is maybe a good way to ease into that, because it's not like Moby Dick where it's this very complex thing that you have to kind of chew on. A lot of the book just flies by, but then there's paragraphs here and there where it's worth a reread and you just kind of process what he's even saying. And there's a lot of emotion there. If you're a very plot-driven reader, I'd still say give it a chance, but you may not like it. Again, I'm not going to say a whole lot of what happens, but there are big expanses of the book where they're just wandering. The kind of central goal for them is to get to the coast and head more south, because where they are, and it's not stated where, they're going to freeze to death in the winter because it's already ripping cold. And that's not a spoiler, really. It's mentioned pretty early on. But yeah, a lot of the joy from this book is just from moments, something that the father does to ensure their survival. Incidents where you're impressed with his industriousness. Moments between the father and son that just read like exactly something a father and son would do. There's a couple moments in the novel, and I almost don't want to repeat them verbatim because part of the joy is reading it. But okay, so the little boy is quite young. They never say his age because they partly don't know. Calendars don't really exist in the wasteland, but you can tell he's like almost a toddler, maybe a little older, but he's pretty young. And there's a couple moments where he will say something to the father, and the father looks at him and says, "Where did you learn that?" And that sounds like such a small thing, but I love that. That's so true. That's how kids are. They'll have a saying that is like way too mature for how old they are, and you don't even know where they picked it up. And it's hilarious to me that still happens in the apocalypse. Little bits like that are some of my favorite parts of the book. I also love the level of detail that McCarthy puts into the wasteland. There's little things that I personally wouldn't have even thought to include, but they paint the wasteland. I'm going to read another small little thing. It's on page 63, so still pretty early, and it's not like a big spoiler, but if you're worried about spoilers, maybe go read it and then come back. They run into another person who is potentially a threat, I'll say. Everyone that you cross in this wasteland is potentially a threat, right? He came forward, holding his belt by one hand. The holes in it marked the progress of his emaciation, and the leather at one side had a lacquered look to it where he was used to stropping the blade of his knife. I would not think to put in detail about him adding extra holes to his belt because he's getting skinny, and the little worn part of his belt where he's stropping a knife on it. That, I don't know why that stuck out to me very early in the book, but it's like, that's weirdly brilliant. Maybe I'm just a simpleton. I honestly, that's fair. Anyways, that's honestly all I can say without getting too much into it. They're wandering, and there's big stretches where they're just surviving. There's moments of love between the father and son that's expressed in a really not obvious way, but somehow still rings very true. He does a good job of not explicitly stating what kind of horrors are out there. Horrors, not, that are out there in the wasteland. And you catch glimpses of it, and he really builds this kind of murky undercurrent of what humans are capable of when they're all starving and freezing to death. When I say most of the book is wandering, things do happen. Don't get me wrong. I just don't want to spoil them because they're built up to so well. There's a lot of quiet moments in the novel that are punctuated by these bursts of intensity. I'll give you one small spoiler. They do run into other people. Are they good? Are they bad? But there are some really intense parts. I should have maybe written an essay on this instead of just notes. I think that's almost all I can say about it without spoiling more of it. And I don't want to do that because I really want people to read it. I'll say this. It is at times very sad. It's on a very, very short list of books that have made me cry ugly tears. And I know people say it's miserable, it's a sad book. It is in parts, but it's also very hopeful. Part of the book is about the atrocities that people can commit when they're pressed, because we are animals. But another big part is about how humanity prevails. The father and the son, they exist for each other despite everything. And they also exist because they believe in good. And that's really touching. 2020 was a pretty weird year, and it looks like 2021 is also going to be a bit of a doozy. This might be a good book to read because it is depressing sometimes, but it's also pretty hopeful, I would say. And I didn't expect that because I feel like lots of the reviews and comments gloss over that. Anyways, I think that's all I have to say. Sorry if you didn't get anything from this because I don't really spoil it. Again, I really think you should go find it and read it. Get a copy from the library. Find a used copy if you're not sold on it because books are expensive. I know for myself, like I said, I gave it a read and knew that I'd want to own it. I'm someone who's actually trying to cut back on the amount of stuff they own. But this is one that I'm going to want to open and reread the whole thing or just reread passages. Cormac McCarthy, he might be one of my favorites. I mean, again, only 2 books, but he's good. He's a good writer. Thank you so much for watching, if you did watch. I've got more videos on the way that aren't necessarily reviews, recommendations. Coming up, we might not be done with The Road. It's possible that I have a review of the movie coming up, which will be spoiler-filled because you can't really talk about a movie of a book without talking about the differences, and you can't talk about the differences without spoiling parts of the book. So that's not going to be the next video. There's only so much focusing on one book that you can do before this just becomes a channel dedicated to the road. But there are more things to come. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Again, thanks so much for watching. Tell me what you thought of the book. Tell me what you thought of the video. If you thought I was a big stupid idiot, please tell me. I love that. And I'll hopefully see you again when I get around to doing this more. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.